really none of your business. It's none of my business.
Bonjour, Falcha. Welcome to the Motivated Classroom August Spotlight. Today is day 11 and it is the episode 41 with Steve Smith that I want to concentrate on today. So I think this is a nice little addition to the previous episodes I focused on around second language acquisition. Steve's episode really focused on like memory and retention of language, but we also of course got into talking about input and output and classroom tasks. It was really nice. I think one of the first things that like Steve said was really quite nice to kind of repeat. And he says, if teachers have some understanding of how memory works from the best knowledge we can get from cognitive psychology and cognitive science, then that should help us adapt our teaching to maximize retention. If you understand how learning works, maybe we can redefine our teaching or even transform our teaching to adapt to this learning process that occurs in the brain. Learning is often defined as a change in long-term memory. That's one of the definitions given about that's given for any form of learning, and really learning is memory. It's building long-term memory. So anything we can do in the classroom in terms of managing cognitive load, increasing interest, reducing anxiety, increasing feelings of self-confidence, self-efficacy, anything we do like that will give us more confident learners and give us more successful learners, the type of learners who want to continue with languages as long as possible. And I thought that was really nice, is that, of course, listening carefully to the episodes from Bill Van Patten, from Dr. Krashen, from Dr. Lichtman, obviously input is central in all of this. Like, that is the absolute key part, of course, is input. But it's really important, of course, to remember that we are still hoping for learning to take place. And yes, most language learning is implicit, but there is certainly a role to think about how memory works and retention as well, and that can aid or speed up the process at times. And Steve kind of got into this. He was like, the basics of the working memory model really is we hear input or see it, our brain processes that, and we transfer that from working memory into long-term memory. Over time, it gets processed and moved over. And I think what it was really nice is he talked a little about this, and he says, the working model is a form of learning that's often emphasized in relation to conceptual subjects like chemistry or history, talking about concepts. Language learning, as you know, Liam, that's what he said, it's a bit different to that, because we do actually learn a lot completely bypassing our working memory. We pick it up naturally as we go along. And of course, that is where the role of implicit learning or natural acquisition comes in. And that was exactly what BVP and Lichtman and Krashen and Dr. Henshaw were all speaking about it to do with the research around this. So we spoke then about the role of input, and they said, of course, input is massively important. It is the central component. And then he spoke a little bit of a thing about output. And of course, Dr. Henshaw spoke about the role of output in language development, not acquisition, but it develops our confidence, it develops our use of language, it develops the way we say things. And Steve talked about this too. He said there's a thing in the cognitive psychology which is called the production effect. They've done lots of experiments in the labs to try and compare whether people remember things better if they just hear them, read them, or if they actually say them or write them down. And many experiments have shown that when you write something or when you say it out loud, it sticks in your mind better. And then he goes on to talk about the role that it has to just like repeat things in your head. And he gives us the example of delayed dictation, where, you read things out to the students and you try and say, like, I don't want you to write anything for 10 seconds. And of course, what they're doing is they're repeating those words in your head. And what's really nice in here is Steve says, the research shows that we're also activating the phonological part of working memory that's called the phonological loop when we do this. So even when you read quietly, when you think about language, you're activating the same part of the brain that's used when you actually use the language or hear it. There's a good case there to be made for anything that involves reading. And we know there's huge amounts of research around the importance of reading, listening to the teacher while the student is reading a transcript, or rehearsing things in your head. So I thought that was really, really nice. He then gives a lovely overview of cognitive load theory, which I definitely recommend you listen to if you're unaware of. And then we spoke about stories and the role of story in memory and language retention and acquisition, and the research about how powerful it is. And he does give some lovely examples. He says, there's an aspect of memory which is called episodic memory. That sort of memory you have when you remember things that happen to you that affect you personally. And there's something about stories, which in history and in literature is an incredibly powerful source of imagination that engage us emotionally. As soon as you get that emotional engagement, you're going to create strong memories, because there is a link in the brain in terms of neuroscience between the sorts of chemicals we produce when we're emotionally aroused and interested in something and our memories. The two are really interrelated. He says, I think that's fascinating. When you can engage story and imagination, that's when you encourage memory. Children of any age, they like stories, and sometimes silly stories are absolutely great as a vehicle for language. And of course, I would strongly believe in this from my own research. Language is transferable across many different topics. So yes, story is fantastic for memory. And then he gives us the example of a typical picture talk, just a picture, and giving the backstory. Who are they? What do they do? Where do they come from? What do they work at? What's their profession? What's their family life like? Where do they go on the weekends? And by inventing those details about that, not only raising autonomy for motivation, but you're also raising those repetitions in the head. And you're also, of course, putting that emotional engagement in there, which means that it's much more likely to be retained. So that was Steve Smith's episode 41. Definitely go back and check it out. It was a great episode about memory, language acquisition, retention, and I will see you tomorrow.